And you're back again. Amazing. Woo! Video number 6 out of 7. You're hanging in there, guys. Come on, we can do this. Welcome to the Aletheia Society, where we're pursuing truth and beauty and goodness, and it doesn't matter what. But I'm going to put a big smile on your face. Everybody, we're going to study the wasteland. Okay, let's try that again. We're going to study the wasteland. Okay, fine. I get it. The wasteland doesn't put smiles on people's faces, does it? Maybe after we finish. But it's important philosophically. It's important philosophically. Might be the most important book we do this year. I don't know for sure. But anyway, so let's just get right to it. I want to do the slides first, and then I want to come back here to, talk mode, as it were, and walk through this amazing section called the Fire Sermon. And it's remarkable. Okay, so this is number 6. Now, big change. Hey, wake up. Big change. Instead of doing 3 and 4 in this video, I don't know what I was thinking. Yeah, I don't know. I must have been drinking whatever used to be in this thing, but we can't do that. The Fire Sermon's way too long. So we're going to sort of stick number 4 along with 5. 4 is super short. You may have noticed that, Death by Water. So we're going to just do Fire Sermon in this video, and then the 7th video we'll wrap it up and try to draw some conclusions. So remember, we did Burial of the Dead, recollections of death and decay from 17 million deaths during World War I. A game of chess, how are relationships impacted because of this massive shift in the culture. Now, relationships are viewed more like, I'm trying to outsmart you or outwit you or get the best of you, like a game of chess, instead of the Ephesians chapter 5, love your wives as Christ loved the church. So it just gets more and more depressing. Now we come to the Fire Sermon. Remember, a game of chess was married relationships. Fire Sermon is going to focus on males and females in unmarried relationships. Now, I put it in dark when I made the slides, but we're not doing Death by Water in this video. We'll do Death by Water along with what the thunder said. All right. Okay. A couple of preliminaries before we get into it. Eliot was his mind was just, the cogs were turning all over the place when he wrote this poem. And he organized it. It seems like, just like paint splattered on a canvas, but it's anything but that. It's incredibly well thought out and organized even. And another way that he organized it is in the ancient world, the ancients used to believe that all of reality, everything you see, is made up of only 4 elements: earth and fire and water and air. That's it. There's nothing that exists materially that's not either earth or fire or water or air. That's what they believe. Eliot structures the poem based upon those 4 fundamental elements. So part 1, of course, focuses on earth with the funeral, the Anglican prayer book funeral, the burial of the dead bodies going into the dirt. Part 3, the one we're going to do now, is going to focus on fire. It's the Fire Sermon, and burning and heat and fire are going to be intense. Sorry about that. During as we read this part, the next part, Death by what? Water. There you have it. And then I'll explain when we get to part 5 how it focuses on air. So just another interesting way that Eliot organized the poem. So let's take a look at the Fire Sermon. So one of the things that you may have already figured out, maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but let me just strongly suggest that you are still using the Norton Critical Edition. Guys, you got to have this, because I know the poem is only a few pages long, but you need all of these little excerpts of primary source material in the rest of the book to make any sense of it. And this is a really good example, because the fire sermon comes from an actual sermon that the Buddha gave. Now, who is the Buddha? First of all, Buddha is not a name. It's a title. It just means enlightened one. The man's name was Siddhartha Gautama. He's the founder of Buddhism several hundred years before Christ. He was actually a Hindu living in India, and he was just super wealthy, prince. He was living in a palace, and his dad wouldn't let him see that there was pain and misery and poverty out there. And finally, when he grew up, became a young man, he went out into the world, to the community, and he saw pain and suffering and misery. And I guess he said to himself, I want to make it my life goal to help eliminate pain and suffering. And that's how Buddhism became a world religion. So we're going to be talking way more about Buddhism. Yeah, this whole section is really about Buddhism. So you kind of have to understand it, which I will do for you. So leave behind those material things. So Buddhism starts like this. I'm going to break it down into 4 tenets and then a path forward. Okay. Number 1, all of life is suffering and misery and pain. Wow. Starts off on a really happy note, doesn't it? There's some days when you relate to that. Maybe when you have a happy day, you don't. But the big picture is that life is filled with pain and suffering. Tenet number 2 of Buddhism. The way to eliminate the misery and suffering is to eliminate desire or craving, wanting. If you could get to where you are not attached to the things of this world, then you won't care if you don't have them. Therefore, your expectations won't be smashed, and you'll be relatively happy. So number 3, if you eliminate desire, you eliminate suffering. And then how do you do that? The last point of Buddhism: follow the Eightfold Path. And I'm not going to go over the Eightfold Path right now. It's 8 sort of commandments, I guess. We have the 10 commandments as Christians, sort of like the 8 commandments. And it's like, right thinking, right understanding, right action, right behavior. They're just guidelines on how to live your life to eliminate desire, which will eliminate suffering. And once you do that perfectly, which it may take you a really long time to do that, you will break out of what's called the wheel of rebirth and death and rebirth. We call that reincarnation. So Hindus and Buddhists believe in reincarnation. But if you can reach what you might call a perfect state of nirvana, which is a sort of a complete nothingness, and your psyche, your soul is kind of blown out, and you're a totally empty vessel now, you have been enlightened, and you will experience what's called moksha, or deliverance, and you'll break out of that wheel, and you'll somehow experience something called nirvana. Okay, but all of that's fun and good to talk about. The part of Buddhism that is important here is the part about desire, longing, craving, because we've been talking about that from the beginning, haven't we? We've been saying that the wasteland is about Western man now wants and craves meaning and purpose, but there is none. Our whole being seems to cry out that there's a reason we're here, and maybe there's a higher being that cares about us and created us. But after World War I, we can't conclude that there is such a thing. So there's this tension between memory and desire, remembering happier times and craving for them, but being unfulfilled. Now, we are going to be talking about, as we talk about these unmarried female and male relationships, We will look at some romanticized sexual encounters. But the bottom line is that married, unmarried, there's even a little small section in here about homosexual relationships. All is barren, worthless. Romance is dead. We are now left to assume a materialistic worldview in which you and I are nothing but a collection of chemicals, which means there's no morality, no hope, no peace, no Christ, no Savior, no future, no heaven, no forgiveness of sin, because there is no sin. It's the wasteland. It's cold and it's barren, and it's covered in a lot of trash. And that is what our culture has come to. All right, now big picture themes. Notice what Eliot's going to do in the fire sermon here in this part of the wasteland is he's going to talk about the guys. Listen, time out. Listen, wake up. Guys, listen, there's going to be a lot you're not going to understand in this section. Eliot is pulling out, Buddhist references. I mean, he's obscure poetry. He throws in Shakespeare, a little curveball, St. Augustine's in there a little bit. You're not going to understand it all, guys. Don't worry about it. I'm giving you the big picture so you can read the poem, get what you can out of it. You'll get more out of it when you read it in 5 years or 10 or 15 or 20. But the big idea is that desire is destructive now because there's no fulfillment of it. Remember the illustration I gave you in the previous video? You're thirsty, you're thirsty, you're thirsty. There's no water. Fire and ashes. Hedonistic behavior. Now, if we don't have any meaning, and if God didn't make us in his image, then wouldn't we just be like animals? And wouldn't we just, participate in all kinds of hedonistic and activities and promiscuity and drug use? Yeah, because there wouldn't be any reason to do that or not to do that. Just, if that's your choice, that's your choice. And the section ends with lots of burning, emphasizing this theme that desire ultimately leads to destruction and emptiness. All right. We're not going to get into that one this time. So, friends, I hope you're hanging with me. I hope you also know that there is not a work of literature, maybe in everything I teach, maybe except James Joyce's Ulysses or Finnegan's Wake or something like that. There's nothing that I teach that's harder than the wasteland. So don't be discouraged. Hang with me. It's a good thing to wrestle with here. So, all right, let's open up fire sermon. The first thing I want to point out is something that you don't actually learn until line about 218, and that is who is speaking. Who is speaking? Well, you don't learn that, and if you look way over there about line 218, I, Tiresias, though blind, throbbing between two lives. So let me just explain who he is now so we won't have to do that later. If you remember from your ancient mythology, your studies of ancient literature, Tiresias is the blind prophet. He's sort of like Where's Waldo? He just kind of shows up. He shows up in Homer. He shows up in Aeschylus. He shows up in Sophocles. He just kind of pops up in just about every story. And he's the blind prophet who, even though he's physically blind, he can see mentally and spiritually. He can tell the future, and he knows that people have done things. So he's, he kind of has that superpower, but he's blind. And we'll reference him when we come back. Now, guys, listen, the first 35 lines, for the sake of time, I'm not going to just read down through the whole thing, but this first section is focused on, sorry, I'm on the wrong page, actually. There it is. Okay. This, actually not 35 lines, about 15, maybe, or 20. Another thing Eliot's doing on the organization is he's cycling through the wheel of the seasons. Notice we started in spring. April's the coolest month. And then about 10 lines down, we have summer. Summer surprised us coming over the Starnberger Sea. Now we're in late fall. You'll see why in a minute. But right here at the beginning, this is probably referencing, just take my word for it on this one, probably referencing a place in London near the Thames River. Now, what's the Thames? I know it's pronounced Thames, but it's spelled like Thames. Okay, but don't pronounce it like that at dinner parties. All right, they'll think you're weird. Or at least if you do, don't tell them I was your teacher. I'm just kidding. Okay, but it's Thames. And so this is maybe a place where teenage boys and girls, unmarried couples would come, sort of a lover's lane kind of thing. I'm not going to go into detail, but all of that is past now, and it's late fall, so there's none of that stuff going on. The river's tint is broken, the last fingers of leaf clutch and sink into the wet bed. The wind crosses the browned land. See, the nymphs are departed. The nymphs are departed. Yeah, they're gone. Okay, there's no more loving going on. Sweet Thames runs softly. And here's how we probably know all of it. The river bears no empty bottles, no sandwich papers, silk handkerchiefs, and cardboard boxes. In other words, when the lovers are coming, to the lovers lane here, they're leaving their trash, and you can tell when there's been a lot of people, but there isn't any of that now. That's past. Cigarette ends, the nymphs are departed. So we start off the fire sermon with this theme of love, some kind of love, not the right kind of love, but love that isn't anymore. There was a time, memory back there, not anymore. There can't really be any kind of real biblical love, can there, in the wasteland? There's no 1 Corinthians 13 agape love in the wasteland. It's just chemical reactions. And Eliot's playing around with that a little bit here. Now, by the waters of Leman, I sat down and wept. This is actually where Eliot was when he wrote this. He was actually in a sanatorium in Geneva. And this is the name of a lake nearby. But he had his own mental health problems. And he was working through that in a sanatorium while he was writing The Wasteland. So when he says, I sat down and wept, this is kind of autobiographical. But if you'll notice, that is also a reference from Psalm 137, which is a voice of the exiled Jewish people in the Old Testament when they were sent into Babylonian exile. And we have weeping and longing and crying, desiring to be back in our home in Jerusalem. But alas, we can't. You see this common theme? I'm going to keep beating it and beating it and beating it. Okay? We want it. We crave it. We know there should be meaning to life. But so Eliot's basically trying to figure out a million different ways to say that same thing. There's an Andrew Marvell poem he quotes. You can see that. But what he's saying here in this little short section is that this, the wasteland is our new Babylon. Western culture is in exile, but you know what? The Jews got to go back eventually. Eliot is thinking, I don't know if we're going to go back. Maybe we're just going to keep spiraling into despair and hopelessness. The next section, I think Eliot is simply well, when Eliot actually rhymes something, I know you're going to think, why does he have to do that? When he actually rhymes something like most poets do, he's probably being facetious. He's probably doing it in a mocking sort of way. So this next section rhymes, but it's really just descriptions of the horrors of World War I. A rat crept softly through the vegetation, dragging its slimy belly on the bank, while I was fishing in the dull canal on a winter evening round behind the guest house, musing upon the king my brother's wreck, and on the king my father's death before him. That's a reference back to the Fisher King. Remember, we talked about Jesse Weston's book From Ritual to Romance. And bones, white bodies naked on the low, damp ground, and bones cast in a little low, dry garret, rattled by the rat's foot only year to year. But at my back, from time to time, I hear the sound of horns, motors, which shall bring Sweeney to Mrs. Porter in the spring. Again, so there's your description. Why are we desiring? Why are we longing? Why is it unfulfilled? It's graphic. It's horrible. Again, 17 million deaths. What do we say? 4 9/11s every single day for 4 years straight, nonstop. That's how you get to Wasteland. I'm going to skip over the next section. It's actually from a song during Eliot's time that was kind of vulgar. So it's not vital that we break it down to understand the poem. But that twit, 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 do you recognize that? Jug, 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 jug. Do you remember what that was? Oh, you remember all the way back? The Nightingale. Remember the story of Philomel, and who was raped, brutally raped, and then had her hands chopped off and her tongue cut out so she couldn't do anything about it and she couldn't tell anybody about it. The Nightingale still desires to sing her song. But as she sings her song, as we said earlier, she sings it across a desert land that doesn't care. This next section is about, so we've done married couples, unmarried couples, is a little sort of homosexual interlude. And you know, like, look, it doesn't matter. Eliot is not saying he agrees with, or he's not making a statement about the morality of homosexuality. I think what he's trying to do is say there is absolutely no relationship that is untouched, unscathed, unburdened, and not destroyed by what has just happened from 1914 to 1918. And the reason we know it is because the lines to luncheon at the Cannon Street Hotel, followed by a weekend at the Metropole, those were common hangouts for homosexual individuals during that time. So we know that. Now, the entire next section, we're going to cover a big swath of material here very quickly, because starting with At the Violet Hour, When the Eyes and Back, is about this woman who's a typist, a clerk, who has some sort of common job where she goes in and does, you know, seemingly mundane things, goes home at night, lives her life, nothing really special, trying to pay the bills. And she has a young man. He's called a carbuncular man, which it's just really disgusting. It's over in, I think it's like line 231. Carbuncles are like boils, you know, they're like big, nasty, gross zits, you know, on your face. So this guy is described, which makes this whole thing even just 10 times worse. But don't get me wrong, it's already horrible. Tiresias now is kind of in the background. I, Tiresias, though blind, throbbing between two lives, he still sees all and is recounting all of this, because who else would know better? He's the prophet. He can see even though he can't see. And it says, throbbing between two lives. You may or may not have known this about Tiresias, but we don't have time for all these backstories. He was once a woman and was turned into a man. Okay, and he was blinded in a dispute that took place between Hera and Zeus, Juno and Jupiter. But the whole point of having Tiresias here is that, hey, nobody is better to see and judge relationships between males and females because he's been both. Nobody, nope. No, I'm serious. Like no one else is in that category. So that's probably the reason that Tiresias is the one that's like overseeing this. He's like, yeah, trust me, I've been a man and a woman, and this life now is a disaster for everybody. So this woman has a young man, a carbuncular man, over to her house. I don't know, it's a date, they're having dinner, and unfortunately he attacks her and he rapes her. So you can read, I'm not even gonna go through the whole thing. Homeward, it brings sailor home from sea. The typist home at tea time, lights her stove and lays out the food. Out of the window, perilously spread her drying combinations, blah, 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 blah. Stocking, slippers, camisole stays. Again, Tiresias, old man with wrinkled dugs. He's still overseeing this whole thing. He can see it all happening. But as the story goes, if you get down as a silk hat on a Bradford millionaire, the time is now propitious as he guesses that's the carbuncular man, the date that this typist is having over. The meal is ended. She is bored and tired and he endeavors to engage her in caresses. So he starts, like hugging her and getting fresh, as we used to say when I was growing up, which still are unreproved if undesired, flush and decided. Here it is, line 239. He assaults at once. Exploring hands encounter no defense. What's she going to do about it? His vanity requires no response. I, Tiresias, have foresuffered all. Yeah, I can testify as a male and a female. This is horrible for both. This is evidence of our decay and decadence and our depraved state. She turns and looks a moment in the glass, hardly aware of her departed lover. So she's just been raped. This woman who's just living this very simple, common life, probably all by herself. He leaves. Well, now that's done. I'm glad it's over. You see, in this new reality, something like that is just, oh, well, whatever. I guess that's what you have to expect in the wasteland. When lovely woman stoops to folly and paces about her room again alone, she smooths her hair with automatic hand and puts on a record on the gramophone. So she's dancing, but she's dancing by herself. It's a one-person dance. The only person she would have possibly had any chance to dance with that night was the guy that just came over to her house and attacked her, raped her, and now he's gone. Do you sense the despair, the meaninglessness, the loneliness that Eliot's trying to capture with this scene? It hurts, and that's what Eliot he wants your soul to feel a little twang there, like, oh my word. The next section is a popular song during this time. This music crept by me upon the waters. A popular song, everyone liked it, but I think that Eliot includes the lyrics here, this love song, because what meaning does a love song have? This woman is just raped. Now she puts on this record. A gramophone is a record player, okay? Which is weird because those things are coming back now. All my kids now have record players and they're collecting vinyls. We haven't done that for like 30 years. I had those things when I was growing up. But anyway, they're popular again. By the time you're watching this video, they may not be. But she puts one on, but she doesn't have anybody to dance with. And listening to a love song, imagine the crushing sense of pain and loneliness. She's listening to a love song after what's just happened to her. Now, the next section, starting with The River Sweats, this is from Wagner, Richard Wagner, and he's a composer of operas. So these are lyrics coming out from Wagner. It's Die Götterdämmerung. look, my German is probably terrible, but I am familiar with that opera. I just don't know if I'm pronouncing the name of it. But this whole section here, once again, is the context is just making a mockery of love because it just can't exist anymore. The Elizabeth section is certainly referring to the greatest ruler in all of English history, Queen Elizabeth I. She was called the Virgin Queen because she remained single throughout her entire life. Okay. She died in 1603, but she reigned for like half a century. And whether she did it because she thought, well, I'll be a better ruler if I remain, single, or whatever the case, there is this sense of, we know that she had desires. We know that she wanted to be in a relationship with a man. And indeed, she actually was. She just never got married. There was a guy named Robert Dudley. Historians are pretty sure that they had a relationship. But again, do you get the sense of, it goes back to Tristan und Isolde, desire and longing, but it can't be fulfilled. So Queen Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, is a good example to bring in here. And that's what he's doing in this next section, starting with Elizabeth and Leicester. Okay, and then mixing it in with the Wagner, way la la la, lay, wa la la, lay la la. That's just from the Wagner song. Now, the rest of this section is yet another example of an unsatisfactory romance. And this one, man, Eliot's covered all the bases at this point. This one is just purely physical. Again, we've had married couples, wasteland. Unmarried couples, maybe they love each other, maybe they don't. Oh, maybe then there's a rape, there's violence. Now we just have pure physical, lustful attraction. Trams and dusty trees, Highbury bore me, Richmond and Kew. Undid me by Richmond, I raised my knees, supine on the floor of a narrow canoe. I'm sorry to have to explain this, but that is referring to the woman who is having sexual intercourse. My feet are at Moorgate and my heart under my feet after the event. He wept. He promised a new start. So this is what's crazy. He now feels guilty about having the sexual relationship with the woman out of wedlock. But wait a second. If there's no God and there's no meaning and no purpose to life, then that wouldn't be wrong. It just would be. You see, we believe that is wrong and inappropriate because of what the Bible teaches about Christ and the church and husband and wife, and there are reasons that God knows it's best for us to wait on that physical relationship until we get married. But if there's no God, then none of that exists. So why does he feel guilty about it? You see what Eliot's trying to capture here? We're living in this cultural wasteland. We've concluded that there can't really be a God or meaning or purpose. So why in the world do I feel guilty about something? That tension, that unresolvable tension, that's what Eliot's trying to capture. I made no comment. What should I resent? If there's no shared conscience, then why am I resenting that I just did this with this girl? When we read The Stranger next, guys, it's all going to tie in, and honestly, it's going to make even way more sense. Because then we get into existentialism, because existentialism is the worldview that kind of, I think, necessarily has to grow out of this dark, nihilistic worldview. Okay, so you got to kind of hang on for the long haul, but we'll get there. And then finally, a St. Augustine quote. I told you it was coming. To Carthage, then I came. St. Augustine, once again, just like Queen Elizabeth, a great example. because for his purposes here in the fire sermon, because if you remember St. Augustine, you remember St. Augustine, 5th century, Bishop of Hippo, North Africa, is it coming back to you? Wrote Confession, City of God. Okay. He admittedly had a serious problem with lust, struggled with it his whole life, before he was a Christian, after he was a Christian, the whole time. And so Augustine is another good figure of someone who's wrestling with this craving, this desire for something, but it can't or shouldn't be fulfilled. He wrestled with the fire of lust. Burning, 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 burning. And that's how he ends this section. If you happen to have the Norton version, I want you to open to page 54. I'm going to close this out. But he has an excerpt from the fire sermon, Buddha's actual, or what we have of it, the sermon that the Buddha wrote. And there's a couple of sections I just want to point out to you when he says all things are on fire. See, we have these desires, but we got to eliminate. We got to put the fire out, the Buddha says. With the fire of passion, say I, with the fire of hatred, infatuation, birth, old age, death, sorrow, lamentation, misery. And then he goes through the 5 senses. The ear is on fire. Sounds are on fire. The nose is on fire. Odors are on fire. The tongue is on fire. Tastes are on fire. The body is on fire. Are you getting this? Did I mention anything about fire? And the Buddha's point there is all of our 5 senses, they see things, they hear things, they smell things, they taste things, they touch things that they want. And because you want and crave and desire, that's why you're miserable. You have to eliminate your attachment to these things and then live out the Eightfold Path and you'll be happy. So I think it's very appropriate. And at this time in his life, Eliot was actually toying with becoming a Buddhist. He almost did convert to Buddhism. Remember, I told you earlier in 1927, he's going to end up getting baptized and joins the Anglican Church, becomes a Christian. But at this point in his life, 1922, 21 and 22, he was very interested in seriously considering Buddhism. And you see how it fits the whole structure of Buddhism and such. So guys, I do these incredibly long videos on the wasteland, and I still feel like I probably missed a million things, but it is what it is. We'll wrap it up in the final video, number 7. All right. Thanks for hanging in there, guys. This is a tough one. See you in the next video.